Sorry, Jamal, did we email it to you? I think I emailed it to. Did you email Howard to Jamal's file? You just got, okay. Do you want me? Jamal, you can also just go to
Yeah, I've started.
Okay, we're live.
We're
Hey,
not
everyone.
live.
My name is Ankit Jain. I'm the president of the Young Democrats of Ward 2. And we're excited to co-host this event with the Young Democrats of Ward 6 and Greater Washington. So the Young Democrats of Ward 2 is a group within the Ward 2 Democrats. We got Juan here, who's the chair of the Ward 2 Democrats. Thanks, Juan, for being here. And we're focused on lifting up the voices of young people in Ward 2 within the Democratic Party to make sure the interests of young people are heard and considered when policymakers are making decisions. So one of the main issues facing young people in the city, and really everybody in the city, is the cost of housing. I don't have to tell the people in this room that the rent and the mortgage is too damn high. So what we're really excited today is to have this all-star panel to talk about what we can do to reduce housing costs. All of our panelists share the same goal, which is to create housing that is affordable for the residents of DC. But they share some perhaps different perspectives on just how to make that happen. So what I think we'll hear today is a substantive discussion on the different solutions to reducing housing costs and the pros and cons of those different solutions, and hopefully some consensus on some solutions that we could all agree on that we need to be pursuing as a city. In a city where housing is so expensive, the public needs to have discussions like these where the different solutions are discussed and considered, and where we can decide as a community what solutions we want to pursue, fully informed of the benefits and the detriments of the different options available to us. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from our panel, and I'll hand it off to our moderator, Jamal Holtz, to introduce our panelists.
Amazing. One, thank you all for coming. I think this will be a great discussion. As Ankit mentioned, that housing is a core issue for a lot of young people in this city, especially when we talk about how do we ensure that the young people who live in the city grow up to be able to stay in the city, and preserving young people and continuing our legacy as whether we're DC natives or attracting young people from across the country to come here for school, and building a young workforce to ensure that young people get to stay here and live here comfortably. So all those things, we'll get the opportunity to explore and talk about all those things. I have the honor of serving as the president of the DC Young Democrats, where I get to represent young Democrats in the city and they get to elevate sort of youth voices in a way where we're elevating and talking about topics like housing. So the great thing is you won't hear from me at all today, mostly from this amazing panel of experts who do the work every day in this field. I won't go too long in sort of bios and introductions, but we'll sort of let them speak a little bit about who they are and sort of their work and some of their open responses. But I want to first introduce Ms. Sheila Reid, right here to my left, who's a real estate broker and developer with the Avanti real estate group. And she's also was a former chair of the DC Board and Zoning adjustments, and sort of has lots of background in this work here locally. So give it up for Ms. Reid for coming. I also forgot to highlight, she's a proud member of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. I was to make the noise, but I'll keep it to myself. Also want to introduce also to her left, Will Merrifield, who's the founder and ED of the Center for Social Housing and Public Investment. Does a lot of work around investments and sort of how do we explore investments where we get to promote sustainable solutions around housing, education, healthcare, and really looking from a policy-centric standpoint, but also an investment standpoint into those programs. Policy areas. So give a round of applause for Will for joining us today. And then finally, Alex, who serves as the DC Policy Director for Greater Washington. Thank you, Alex, for joining us today. Alex has lots of background in history and transportation, and bike life and sustainability in our city. So Alex will sort of bring a different perspective, will represent many different constituencies here in the district. So thank you all for joining us. So, I'd rather you all also jump into, as I ask this first question, jump into sort of, a little bit about your work and sort of what you do in your role, because I could not do that well at all. But from within your unique roles and your perspectives, how do you think we tackle sort of housing affordability in the city? And sort of how are you working within your unique roles to tackle housing affordability in Washington, D.C.? So I'll start with Ms. Reid and I'll toss the mic.
That's a really loaded question because here in the city, we see like the trend of housing affordability, like this kind of surge to the point that there are young people have a very difficult time, like people who are in their 20s and 30s. Now, that was my group, who were in their 20s and 30s, all on this time of this housing crisis for very affordable. And so at this point in time, there has to be something done to be able to address the fact that it is not the same. Oh, it's not the same. No, Mike. It's not the same scenario now. So adjustments have to be made. For example, one of the things I find that is most problematic is that when there is a quote unquote affordable house that comes in the market, then you have investors who are competing with first-time home buyers, and the first-time home buyers saying, John is saying, hey, I want to buy this house. Let's say the house is $400,000. But I have to get my financing. And then an investor comes and says, well, hey, look, I'll buy the same house, all cash, sell it in 10 days, as is. So what's John gonna do? There is no provision, and I was discussing this when I was on the Black home ownership strike force last summer, as to what can be done about this. But this is what's happening, and as a result of that, we're losing ground as far as being able to purchase housing. There are hedge funds over in Ward 7 who are able to buy whole blocks of houses, and when that happens, that knocks out people who are trying to buy one little house to live in. And so those are kinds of massive problems that have to be addressed, so that people can now begin to start to afford housing again.
Alex, what's your perspective, your role?
Yeah, so I come to housing sort of through land use, right? So that's a big chunk of my job in Greater Washington, mostly because there are a lot of really amazing groups in the district working specifically on both the production and preservation of income restricted subsidized housing. I want to make a clear distinction here. When I talk about affordable housing, I mean income restricted, which means tested, and subsidized, whether that's privately or by the government. This is a really important distinction for me because most people live in market rate housing, including myself, including probably most of this room. So from a policy perspective, I spend a lot of time talking about theories. It's important for me to distinguish between those two things, especially because the policies that the district has in place, we have a lot for income restricted, subsidized housing, affordable housing. But that doesn't mean that housing is necessarily cheap or what you want to be spending on it for you. I would say that in addition to institutional investors, people who just have slightly more money for a down payment and a more aggressive agent are outbidding you. So, the thing that I like to pull this all back to is not operating in a scarcity mindset when I do my job, right? So I'm looking at where we build housing in the district, how much housing we build, if it's being built in places where we have historically not built anything at all, and we can rectify some of those imbalances because things are really deeply imbalanced. There's some very wealthy neighborhoods whose residents would not be at risk of displacement and may just have to suffer the indignity and inconvenience of 18 months of construction to get some apartments where they're currently illegal. So I like to look at form. I like to talk about theory. I feel very lucky to have the job that I have, where I can talk to both people who are supportive of what GGWASH believes in, and from time to time work with the DC government to realize some of that. Some of the big priorities for us recently have been land acquisition. I would like the district to be able to acquire more land, leverage that value to build more income restricted housing, more subsidized housing, market rate housing. Also making sure that we're spending the money that we do have effectively. making sure that it's going as far as possible and changing some stuff, right? Parking costs a lot of money, especially when you're building multifamily housing. Making sure that we're looking at, are we getting our money's worth out of what we're subsidizing on certain parcels? So I get to talk at a big level. It's very cool. Juju Wash doesn't advocate on specific projects too often. We from time to time, but we try to keep it zoomed out. And that's kind of where I get to spend my time.
If you don't mind, before we go to Will, Alex, I want to sort of hone in on, so you stated two theories. The theory sort of around, income restricted housing, and then this theory around sort of, subsidized housing, which is often one of the two routes that some governments, locales take to sort of, ensure housing affordability. But I want to sort of, dig a bit deeper into practice, right? So like, you do a lot of work across the region, as well. What are some models or sort of in practice have you seen, or sort of ways of peer to reform that you've seen where either income restricted or subsidized housing has worked to ensure affordability?
Yeah, so I would say income restricted / subsidized, right? They're kind of in the same bracket. And then like, just by virtue of like, I suspect if I can look at his notes that Will's gonna talk a little bit about the Housing Production Trust Fund and low income housing tax credits. And those are things that finance capital A affordable housing, where then those units are typically restricted to how much money someone makes. And they have to apply, they have to get into this. So it's very different than walking up to an apartment and saying, I would like to rent something here, not being discriminated against or turned away for an unlawful reason when you go to do that. That's a very different process, although it may look the same from the outside. I think like, is the entire thing supposed to be about models? Because we can certainly talk a lot about like, we have a housing production trust fund in the district, other jurisdictions in the region do not, right? We have rent stabilization in the district, other regions in like the other jurisdictions of the region do not, right? So even if the things that we have are insufficient, we have a lot of things that other jurisdictions don't.
That's a good point. I think we have new panelists join us, but before we get to you, I want to give Will the opportunity to introduce himself and sort of share your role and sort of the work you do around achieving ensuring housing affordability.
Thank you. My name is Will. I worked for about a decade at the Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless before I started the Center for Social Housing and Public Investment. At the legal clinic, what I did was I represented tenant associations going through very large scale redevelopments. So I worked with tenant associations to try to keep their housing affordable through those large scale redevelopment projects. And you know what I saw, which made me increasingly frustrated when I worked at the legal clinic, was too often the district giving away public lands and public money to subsidize developers to build affordable housing, and that affordable housing not being built. Between 2002 and 2013, the district, I believe, gave away about $1.7 billion worth of public subsidies. And during that same time period, the number of affordable units was cut in half. The number of high-end units tripled. So what happened, in my view, was that the government was giving away public resources. Developers were taking those resources, demolishing affordable housing, building housing in its place that was not. So I started the Center for Social, well, in 2020, I ran for public office on this concept of social housing. The social housing model is a model that is made famous in Vienna, Austria. And sort of my want to advance that model is my belief that in DC, we need systemic changes to solve the affordable housing crisis. That sort of trying to get around the edges, like we've been doing, promoting programs like inclusionary zoning, ADUs, all these small, fixes that they don't get to the heart of the matter. And the heart of the matter is that we need to produce affordable housing that is rationally and efficiently created to meet the needs of DC residents, specifically working class DC residents. So the way social housing does that really quickly is that the government looks at housing as infrastructure. The government builds housing that is meant to house people at all levels of income. So it's a mixed income model. It's government owned, so there is no profit motive. It cuts out the developer, which cuts out the profit motive, which means that when people live in a social housing model, all their rent that's being paid is used productively. First, it's used to cover the operating costs of the building, make sure the building's kept nice. And once that operating cost is paid, the surplus rent that's left over, there's no part of that goes up into a developer. Instead, that money is used to pay down the construction costs. So social housing creates deeply affordable mixed income housing that pays for itself. The last part of social housing that makes it work is this thing called rent cost subsidization. So because social housing is mixed income, everybody pays a portion of their rent income, but higher people who make more money, their portion is higher. So they subsidize the lower income tenants. So it's deeply affordable mixed income housing that's self-sustaining. So we'll maybe talk a little bit more of that, but that's how I come at this problem, that we need big systemic fixes, that social housing is the way to do that, and that we know social housing works because it's worked on places.
Yeah, and before we get to Leonard, I want to put a pin in the social housing, but I do want to come back to sort of where have the model has worked and sort of what are some of the how do we see it in practice? Like what steps take government take to get to implement something like that? But Mr. Edwards, who just joined us at the end, who does tremendous work for Bread for the City, which is a DC-based, community-based organization that does a lot of work around how do we end poverty in our city? How do we eliminate the things like ensuring that our residents have medical care, access to food, access to clothing, legal services, all the things necessary to help us end poverty in the city. So I want to give a round of applause for Mr. Edwards for joining us. And Mr. Edwards, poverty, of course, is a huge issue when it comes to, again, housing affordability. One of the questions that I posed to the panel was, if you can talk a little bit about your unique role, but also within your unique role, so the role you Bread for the City, your workplace, and helping attack housing affordability in the city.
Well, thank you very much. Thank y'all for having me. Yes, I work for Bread for the City's Housing Advocacy Department. And, we are a nonprofit that helps with free legal, free clothing, free food, free medical, and free health care. And one of the things that can help with poverty, it's no big deal, doesn't take rocket science, it's money. It's expensive. It's real simple. We can find money to do everything else with, but to help people who need the help. And then do everything through racial equity lens. It's really simple. We make it hard. It's the powers that be who want to keep the money, so-called build a tax base. Woo-woo. No, we need all of that. The low-income poor people need that also. And a diverse community, better community for everybody. It's not hard, and I don't understand why we don't have more will to accomplish these simple things. Give low-income people money, Bread for the City and each of the river collaborative. During COVID, we gave people, eligible people, something like $10,000 per family. Okay, and the myth is Black people will just spend money, just buy a new car, just do this and that with it. Found out in the survey that they took 95% of that money went to what families needed. So what you need a new car? You got a car, you got a car, you got a car. So what? Give people money, let them build their bank accounts up, catch up on their rents. And that up this, look through everything to racial equity lens. I look at a woman, she comes in and she's coming in the Bread for the City for a reason. She needs help. So you already know that. It's not much to do. Then you start thinking, she needs domestic, violence. maybe she's been sexually assaulted. I first look through everything for equity lens. A black male comes in, I'm a black male, I pretty much kind of know what he's coming in here. I mean, until we get to talking, I pretty much know why he's here for a reason. And we ask everybody to, in the city, to first, look through a different lens than what we're used to looking at people. Those first appearances, 99% of the time they're not the correct appearance. They're not what you think about. And another thing, just have free range. Have a section of time to have people just for a year have free range where they don't have to stress over that, where they can just build up the bank account, take care of their needs, things like that. It's not really hard money. And the mayor needs to put more money into real affordable housing, not affordable housing, because affordable housing isn't affordable housing. That AMI and all that. No one can really care about that. They still can't afford that. That's not real. That's not real life stuff. We can go to Mars, Jupiter, but we can't figure these things out. Come on. It's the money, it's the developers. That's what's keeping or pushing people out of DC. And that's not it.
Well, that's a great segue into our next question around sort of, well, thank you for the insight, Mr. Edwards. I do agree that poverty is solving for poverty is a huge form of how we solve for affordable housing, right? Like, how do we put money in people's pockets to ensure that they can be able to afford to live here is a key factor. I want to sort of hone in on this piece around sort of government, the role that government plays in sort of achieving affordable housing and housing affordability in the city. There's been many you all stated many different forms of how we do it. Sort of talked about we need real affordable housing, we need free rent. We need you talked about ICUs and ADUs and versus social housing. These different forms of which many different policy fronts on how we get to achieving affordable housing, or if they work or if they don't. But honing in sort of on that local government piece, we've seen many policies and initiatives sort of around housing from our city leaders. But I want to sort of propose a question for anyone to jump in on this. What are some of the things you've seen this administration do well when it comes to housing affordability? And what are some opportunities for growth to ensure we're closing that affordability gap?
You asking me?
Anyone?
No, in my opinion, our government has done anything well as far as affordable housing. Nothing, zip, nothing. Now, some things they can do is put, real money into like ERAP, Emergency Rental Assistance Program. Stop judging people when they need help with that. Don't say you only get money like annually, and then I come to you annually, and then I come to you one year, and then you want to ask me, well, how you gonna take rent after I give you this money? None of your business. I need help right now. I need help. I need to stop the fall right here. If you don't give me help right now, I'm gonna go down, and then I'm gonna become a problem for the rest of my community. Okay? I don't understand why we have to have people hit skid row before they can get help in housing. You can't do anything without housing. You can't plan for the future. You can't go out and, find a job. You can't go back to school. I mean, the city is better off if people are housed. Now one thing they can do is, you see these condominiums that they built and nobody's lived in since they built them. Okay, that's a lot of space there that you can house people. But she's giving the developers money for those empty apartments. Okay, but and another thing, and Washingtonians have a problem with this also. When they build, we're going to have to go up in these buildings. We're going to have to go higher. Because there's really not enough land to really house the people who wanna stay in the city. And then keep your so-called rich tax base happy also. So we're going to have to unfortunately build high-rise affordable housing and public housing.
We need more Marbury Plaza.
Yeah, exactly.
Zone. Yeah.
Even Washingtonians I speak to, they don't like it. You know, they don't like that. I'm like, look, there's gonna have to be some compromise on everybody's part here to solve this problem. You know, everybody's entrenched in their thing, you know.
Yeah, and Ms. Reid, I know you have tremendous background, well, we about to jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
But I was gonna jump it over to you, but I just wanted to put a pin in, you talked about sort of building up now, right? And you have tremendous background in the zoning requirements, and we'll love, after we'll jump in, for you to sort of hone in on where do we need to put our zoning requirements to ensure that we can, live up to some of those, housing goals. So, Will, please jump in.
Yeah, I think, I think the frustration with not only the Bowser administration, but the previous administration is, we've spent a lot of money on affordable housing. So we've made historic, investments in the Housing Production Trust Fund. And every year, you hear our local politicians, brag about the amount of money they're spending on affordable housing. But what we see in the day to day is things getting worse and worse and worse. So, I mean, over the last decade, rents in DC have gone up 50%. So I think the frustration from, a lot of people that, a lot of the tenants I work with is we're spending money, but we're not getting results. And I would argue that the reason we're not getting results is because we're completely reliant on the private market to be able to produce housing. And that, that the private market isn't able to do that. So my position is when the private market can't do something, we need strong government intervention to do the thing that the private market is not doing. So again, I think, the frustration that people feel is we hear about all the money, we hear about all the investments, but rents have gone up 55%. There's a real disconnect.
Yeah, you made a point around sort of investing in, we'll taking away investment from the private market and ensuring that government is the sole focus of doing this. I mean, there's models where we've seen governments fail trying to be a housing agency. There's models where we've seen government succeed with building policies and structure around private folks doing the work. But are there any models that sort of you've seen across the country where governments played a strong role in sort of producing housing and sort of also playing that landlord sort of role?
Yeah, and I mean, of course, before I give an example, the issue that is the elephant in the room is the DC housing. In fact, it's completely on fire. They have about 8,000 units in their housing stock, and they're dilapidated and falling down. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that the federal government doesn't give local housing authorities enough operating subsidy to keep social housing viable. And two, I think that, again, it's not just this administration, it's previous administrations. There has been a push to privatize our public housing stock and sell it off to developers. And I would argue that when that is sort of the mission of the housing authority to have a fire sale to give away to developers, then the housing authority is good. So our housing authority does not work well. Places that have done that are doing social housing and doing social housing well are focused on this mixed income model, because again, there is no money, there's not enough operating subsidy from the federal government to be able to make a public housing building where everyone is low income. There's not enough rent being paid to cover the costs. So you need a mix of incomes to cover operating costs. But a place like Montgomery County, right across the border, the Housing Opportunities Commission in Montgomery County studied the Vienna model, and they're building 260 units of municipally owned mixed income housing. And I think that they're going to do it well. Again, the model that everybody studies, I just want to give people some numbers to show. The model that everybody studies internationally is the model of Vienna, Austria. In Vienna has about 1.9 million people. 60% of the population in Vienna, Austria live in social housing. social housing is open to about 75% of the population, so it's not strictly means tested. DC has 8,000 public housing units. Vienna has 420,000 social housing units. Now, they've been building their social housing for about 100 years, so they have a big head start, but that is about half of their housing stock is social housing. And that does not account for their rent control units on top of their social housing stock. So their housing stock, only about 7% is outside either the social housing stock or outside of rent control. And people in Vienna, they average about 27% of their income is paid in rent. And it is a world-class city. It's been ranked as the best city to live in the last 10 years in a row. And as a UN headquarters, it is a world-class city. The reason why everybody says it's such a great place to live in large part is because of the affordable housing. And it's because they've created a model that fundamentally creates a public option to be able to choose to pay not that much rent. And that public option competes with the private market, which not only, makes the social housing affordable, but it makes the private market. So again, I think in DC, we need big systemic solutions. And this is a proven solution that would be a great investment, not just for housing, but a jobs program to put money in people's pocket and a way to green our aging housing infrastructure. So that's what, I'm advocating for. There's proposed legislation in the DC Council right now to create an Office of Social Housing. So it's something that I think, as a housing community, we should be rallying around as a real solution.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that as we're discussing these issues, let's be very careful because we start using like generic terms like affordable. What is affordable? We have situations where you have racial discrimination, you have racial disparity, you have income disparity. So then you can't just use these terms across the board, like the affordable housing person who cannot afford something that makes $40,000 that can afford something like, or maybe $120,000, having the subsidy from the government, the mayor's program, they're giving $20,000. However, we have people who make $100,000 who can't buy affordable housing because, like, in going back to where I live, I have college professors, doctors, lawyers, teachers who can't afford to buy in the same neighborhood that we live in. That's a very serious problem. So we have to look at things realistically, and more importantly, in my opinion, is not just a matter of here we're talking about rental housing. My thing is home ownership. Because this is how you start to create generational wealth. You start to then eliminate some of the disparities that we have because people then start to own. And I understand some people have to rent. I rent, obviously, but to the point that we can achieve a paradigm where you have people who are able to start to be able to purchase something, then they can then create generational wealth for their future generations, as well as be able to maybe have the children that maybe start a business, or either they can maybe go to college. These things come from home ownership. Rental is okay, but bottom line is, at the end of the day, there's not much that they can achieve or they get as far as being able to better their lives later. This goes on continuously. I think that's very important. And the other thing, you were asking me about zoning. Zoning, let's be realistic, it is systemically set up to basically favor some people at other people. Look right here in DC, you see, certain neighborhoods, what's up, Ward 3, Ward 2, you have housing that is not as dense, as opposed to in 7 and 8, some of the lower income neighborhoods where there's great density. This is what zoning is all about. And it's not done in abstract. It's done systemically. And as far as you were talking about the height, as far as the high rises are concerned, that's a great idea. However, DC has serious height restrictions. They can only go so far up.
That can be changed.
That can be changed, but only by Congress. That's another thing. So we're not a state. We're limited in things that we can do by great almighty.
No, and I agree. I'm not disputing it, but that can be worked out. If we have to be able to do it.
I think that where there's a way, you can. But I still get it.
Look, it's things like Tokyo and South Korea, limited spaces, you know,
Oh, yeah.
but they've gone up. But like in the home, the table turns into the bed and the kitchen turns into.
Right.
We're gonna have to start thinking like that.
You know, you're gonna have to
Other
lobby,
Americans.
I have to lobby the powers that be.
My table.
It's a lot of powers that be to be able to make changes like that.
Yeah, but we're gonna have to start thinking that way, and, you know, we need all options, every idea out on the table these days. To, fix this affordable housing. You know, price.
Affordable rental or the sale.
Can you explain to people who may not know what zoning means?
It's interesting. Zoning affects everything in our life as far as the plateau. Let's say, for example, city. Each city is divided up into certain areas where housing is built, and the nicer, more expensive, better housing are in the neighborhoods where there's less density. And then you have, of course, like downtown, and you have restricted to commercial areas, office buildings. Then you have industrial, like is that divided up into various zones where housing can actually be placed, predicated upon law. So in order to make, let's say, a better livable city, powers that be would then decide on the zoning map what type of housing or type of buildings are going to go in what jurisdictions. So that's why you see, everything is like kind of like separated and divvied up, so that they try to balance out the use of the land, so that it serves the purpose of what the government wants to actually happen. But remember now, the government and the policy is determined by who? People who are very powerful, people who make policy, people who are in a position to decide who's going to live where.
I want to get Alex in the conversation.
Sure.
Can you sort of jump in on the initial piece on sort of some of those policies and initiatives that you think this administration is doing well, or some opportunities, areas for growth?
Yeah, so I know the immediate desire to castigate anyone who is in charge. I've worked in DC under a couple of different administrations, and I didn't like any of them, but they also do certain things. And I think when Baca took office, she committed to funding the Housing Production Trust Fund at $100 million. During COVID, that bumped up to $400 million because of federal assistance. That federal assistance is gone now. That would have been for, could have been an excuse to say we're just pulling HPTF completely or shrinking that further. It is staying at 100. I would like to go up to 200, racking my brain on where I can find an extra $100 million in the budget the next week, if anybody has any ideas for me. Not like I do the budget, I just talk about it. So I think committing to that is really positive. I think committing to a housing production goal has been really positive, and breaking that down by planning area. It's wonky, it's specific. It doesn't actually matter if you're looking for housing, but if you are trying to create policy around it, actually having an idea of what has been built where and hasn't, and where it hasn't, has been really valuable. I am looking forward to something that was included in the Budget Support Act, which is the legislation that accompanies the budget when the mayor mentions it, that basically gives additional land acquisition power. That's been what I've been working on the past few years. That's really, really important to me, because Will's scheme doesn't work unless we get more land. So I'm trying to get Will some more land. So I'm excited about that. I'm happy to talk more about that at the happy hour. I don't want to go too far into that right now. But as we were talking about this, I was kind of writing stuff down, and I think what's interesting is that we actually do a lot of the things that we are saying. Nobody's very happy with how they work. And there is so DCHA properties, and DCHA is in like an absolutely unforgivable state. Like, this is not a defense of DCHA. DCHA, you can live in a DCHA property at up to, if you are making up to 80% AMI. And I know no one gives a shit about AMI, but that's about $79,000 a year. So you can make $79,000 a year and live in a DCHA property. That cross subsidizes other stuff. But do we like how DCHA is working? No, we don't like it. In Montgomery County, the regime that Will mentioned, which I'm a huge fan of also, those self-subsidizing units, right? The way that that is working is for 50 to 60% AMI only, pretty much. So that's about $49,800 a year to $59,760 a year. Leonard is talking a lot about like people who need cash, which I am very much a fan of. I want to give more people money. Affordable housing is affordable if you can afford it, right? More people should have cash. At the same time, all of these production models like don't quite get you down to like a very, very, very low AMI, right? So the scale of social housing, which I am fully supportive of, I'm a big fan of it, because I think the government should own property, needs to be enormous, need to be huge. Like the buildings need to be huge, the units do need to be like your bed becomes a table. Like they will be smaller than you think. You may not be living in a house with a yard. You may not be able to drive and park in order to make this work if we need to meet the scale of the need. And that is all well and fine by me. I'm okay with that, but many people aren't, and I understand why they're not. So that is in some ways like our own willpower needs to reflect this. Like what else is on my list? Like that or like new communities, the basically like taking like the federal Hope 6 program local, many problems. Many people are upset about that. Like I totally understand why. That was cross-subsidized though. We've done this before. I think it was a mistake that the land got privatized. I can talk about this all day, but we are already doing a lot of this stuff. And I think like the rent is high, that the house you want is too expensive for you because we don't have enough of this stuff. For sure, but like we need to recognize what is already going on. So I think we can isolate like what we're actually mad about. Like if you are mad that you can't own that house that you wanted to own, that is not going to be helped by the Housing Production Trust Fund, especially if you are a market rate buyer. I do my best. I had to look up numbers, that was challenging.
And Bill, I see your hand. We'll get the questions in about 5 to 10 minutes. We're gonna end it in 5 to 10 minutes. I promise you will be first.
Yeah, we can't hear. Yeah, there's a lot of noise back here.
I thought you were gonna be that obnoxious person to be like, I'm putting my ask my question. But we'll speak up. Can you hear it? Can you hear?
Speak up and stand up.
Perfect. I'll speak up.
Hello, maybe stand up.
Do you all feel comfortable with that? Okay, make it a speech. Will, your turn to give a speech.
So can you hear me in the back now?
Can stand up, Will.
Alright. So Alex brought up a lot of really great points. I think wanted to touch on something that Ms. Reid brought up first though. The idea of owning versus renting, I completely agree that home ownership, I own a home. So I completely agree that home ownership as a goal is something that nobody should be cut off from. What I think though is to be able to allow people to pursue home ownership. One, we have to bring down the prices of homes and deal with the issues that Ms. Reid brought up in the first place with institutional investors buying up houses. But second of all, we have to make rent affordable for people. Because if people are constantly in the hole because they can barely afford rent, they're never going to be able to buy a home. So I think that the two go hand in hand. The second point I wanted to bring up that Alex raised, which is a really good point, is what levels of affordability are we hitting with a social housing? I think, and I know, I mean, when you look at in Austria, for example, very low income people are always going to need to be subsidized. So cross subsidization is never going to get down to very low income residents. But how can we subsidize that in a social housing model? We can use the things that we use right now, vouchers, in a social housing model to finance and get very low income people into social housing models and allow that rent from the federal government to help finance the construction of social housing. How do vouchers work now? So we could use vouchers in a social housing model, or we can continue to use vouchers how we use vouchers now. And what do vouchers do now on the private market? They drive up the private market. So vouchers are competing with rent controlled units right now, driving up costs. Now we need vouchers because we have such an affordable housing crisis. So I'm not arguing against vouchers, but what they're doing It's like, you know, if you're subsidizing the private market further in a hot rental housing market, it's like pouring gasoline on the fire. So I would argue that we can get to financing very low income units in a social housing model by using vouchers and social housing model, instead of driving up costs on the private market. What does that government funding do in social housing? It subsidizes more middle class units being able to carry. So I think that's why I'm pretty passionate about, we have to change systems, we have to change models, because the model that we're operating in right now is never gonna solve the problems.
I have a question.
Please.
Will, in your model, sorry, in your model, you're referring to, that it is prototype of what's happening in Vienna. But in that model, is there any, possibility of a person who actually participates to be able to get to own one day?
Thank you, that's a great question. In Vienna, they have a thriving, you know, private market where people can buy if they wanna buy. In Singapore, Alex, you might know this, in Singapore, they're converting a lot of their social housing. Singapore is the other country with a huge social housing program, and they're actually converting a lot of their social housing. Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, they're just allowing people to own the house that they've been living in pursuant to. This is in Singapore. So that's the other model that has a huge social housing apparatus, and it's been able, like, Singapore's used that social housing apparatus to attract a bunch of investment into their country, because people want to invest in a place that has a workforce that is stable.
And limited space.
And limited space, exactly.
Yes.
This feels like a student body president debate. My next question, it's more so from a developer perspective, is sort of, I guess what I'm trying to understand is the role developers play in sort of, particularly to you, Mr. Reid, around, achieving affordability in the city. But one of the questions that was posed to us was, what makes it hard for developers to achieve affordability in the city? What are some of those barriers on why some developers may not want to produce affordable housing in the city?
Again, we say, generically developers, because we have developers who are high income developers who produce nothing but these kinds of buildings we see all around us. That's a different kind of development than me. I'm a small local, moderate income developer for using the live tech model. And unfortunately, live tech model is a rental housing model.
What does live tech mean?
Low income tax credit, meaning that it is how can I put this? It is a means by which the government allows wealthy people to be able to benefit from doing, assisting with the building of low income homes. That's the bottom line of that. However, in order to do any kind of low income housing, we have to have subsidies. It just can't work. The numbers do not work otherwise. So what happens is that the people who decide to do it, is not something that is economically efficient necessarily, because the fact that you have to work the numbers so that all of the various aspects, the expenses are going to be able to mesh with what ultimately be development. So it's like more a work of love. If you want to see this happen, unfortunately, the Housing Reduction Trust Fund is only for rental housing. There is no affordable housing trust fund. I was pushing for that with the Black Home Ownership Trust strike was last summer, because there is no comparable entity for building building affordable housing for people to be able to purchase. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no one just said any other response before we open it up for questions?
I mean, right now, developers build the housing. I agree with Will that we should change that, but right now they do, and nobody else does. What the district builds is public facilities, So for people who are pissed off about school construction, say, and I know that we have found a lot of waste and much to be bothered with in sort of like that part of the world, then expand DGS to building houses. But I don't like the argument that just because the government is bad at it now means that they'll be bad at it forever, because I think there's a lot of potential for this. I do anticipate that, you know, we do have some stuff going on where we have, like, I say we as if I work for the district, which I don't, I just bother the district a lot. But, you know, as we are, the district has moved into ground leasing land, right, which I'm really excited about. That's a change the DHCD made last year and sort of enabling themselves to do that. So there's a point that we're going to get to where the district is acquiring more land, I think, I hope, that it is ground leasing that land, I think, I hope, and using that to subsidize the cost of something. A developer is probably going to be the person who builds that, probably for the next like 20 something years. I do have faith that we can find out a way to make the district into its own construction firm. Or like we can nationalize Clark or something. But that said, right. So that is the role that developers play, is whether or not you like them and whether or not you like some of them, but not all of them. They are the ones that build the housing, and sometimes like individual people build housing, and that's what ADUs are, and that's why that's not particularly effective, because building one teeny tiny house at a time doesn't really work super well. Anyway. ADUs are cute, I love them.
Amazing. Well, I want to open it up for questions. Sir, you'll have first, and I'll go over here. Can you introduce yourself when you ask?
My name is Nick Deladon. I live in DuPont Circle, and I'm just a few blocks away from the police and the fire station, one of the largest public spaces in the city that now is up for development. And my concern is that the city turns to surplusing public land first and ends up with a developer, as Alex says, whose only motive is to make a dollar, which they're entitled to, but there has to be an alternative for the city. If that's what they're going to do, and we're going to end up with no affordable housing, then we should not be going to the developer in order to get the affordable housing that we need. Is there an agreement with in the room on that point?
Yeah, right here, yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Thank you.
Yes.
lucky for you, Nick. I think 1617U is gonna be ground leased. So a developer is gonna build it, but the district is probably gonna own that site.
Does that answer your comment?
I don't know, she's talking technicalities and I don't understand, I don't trust the language that Alex Baca used.
Can you expand on that? What is
Yeah.
Yeah, please expand on it.
Yeah, sure. So,
What a ground lease.
yeah, so like ground lease, it's Dana. All right, I'm sorry. Ground lease, the district owns the lands. They lease it to a private entity for 99 years. That's it. It's like, if you have a lease, it's like a lease that you have. You rent your house, like, or your apartment, you're leasing it, it's basically that. But ground just means they keep the land and something gets built on top of it. Now, I would love if we were moving fast enough with the sort of like acquisition and like sort of retaining ownership scheme that seems to be a little bit experimental right now, that the district would own ultimately whatever building were built on that land. That would be awesome. I think putting the legal structures in place to actually enable that like may take a little bit longer, but a ground lease is an excellent first step, and I'm gonna take the point on that.
I want to get over here.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Janice Farrell, Wharton Committee woman, also an Alpha Kappa Alpha Delta Eta. And I also am the president of the Defense Association of the Bridge, 1221 Mass Avenue. We talk a lot about all of this stuff, and those of us who are doing something, what can young people who are voting do? How could we mobilize individuals to make more noise? And the conversion of downtown commercial buildings to mixed use. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because if you're familiar with TENAC, anyone's, they've been screaming and hollering, I used to be a member, about this same type of thing, affordable housing where workforce individuals cannot afford that. So we talk more about it.
I can just say this, it's going to take tremendous subsidy and it's going to be very beneficial to the developers. I'm not an advocate of that, particularly as far as, I don't think that what I'm hearing is not too much as far as homeownership is concerned, basically rental housing. But because there's a push to what utilizing some of the space downtown for residential housing, they're going to try to make it happen, but it's going to be, to me, extremely costly. And I don't think that at the end of the day, it's going to be the most feasible or most viable.
I would completely agree with that. And just as an aside, because it's kind of funny, right before I came here, I was on Twitter and I saw something pop up like a promoted tweet from, it was a real estate lobby. And it said, rent control is not the way to solve the affordable housing crisis. Convert commercial spaces. So I believe this is an industry, attempt to do what the real estate industry does, to convince municipalities to give them public land, public money to build things that they want to build, not things that are necessarily rationally related to what needs to be built. So I would just second everything that Ms. Reid just said.
So how do we as constituents change the will, like everybody's talking about, how do we change that?
Well, that's the $1 million question. How do you get the people who need the help the most to get out and fight for themselves? That's our biggest problem in the housing advocacy department. If we could get 1,000 people to come down to the city council building and testify, keep the city council up until 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, and then do it again the next day and the next day, they'll start understanding. But it's really hard to get people out. And if you've got an idea, we need to talk and we can, do that, because they're only going to change if they're pushed to change. That's the only thing that's going to change.
Leonard, I think we can get them out.
We need.
Let's talk about that.
Yes, we need.
Yeah, and then we'll get to you.
I just wanted to say that, first of all, thank you guys for putting this together. You did a really great job. It was very informational. But I think that one of the things that is so important, I know I came a little late, but if we're talking about the history of like zoning and ownership, a lot of it goes back to redlining and the ways that Black people were it was literally illegal for a Black person to own property at the inception of this country, when the only people who were citizens were landowners. And so I think that is my mom, but I think that's why she continually circles back to ownership. And I think when you're talking about like, how do you convince the city to do that affordable housing development, it's how do you work with, I think that an answer to that is how do you work with some of the affordable housing nonprofits and community groups to encourage them to pay attention to some of these lots when they become available to acquire, to build that affordable housing, because it becomes this argument between housing justice and free market capitalism, and the two it's not an equal argument. Like, people who own these buildings aren't in this room. And so then it's like, well, how do you encourage those community groups to acquire those properties to build that housing?
This entire time I thought it was a typo on the memo. Like, you were gonna find what I got here. There's actually a Sheila Reid.
There's a Sheila Reid.
Sorry, please.
My name's Nat. I live in Noma. My question is about the housing production trust fund, which you said, I think that Mayor Bowser wants to allocate $100 million. And then, sorry, $100 million might be allocated towards the housing production trust fund. And then you guys are trying to push for $200 million to be allocated towards it. I guess my question is, what does that translate into in terms of number of units? Because I know that the cost of constructing housing is going up significantly. So I don't even know what that level of investment represents in terms of actual housing.
Yeah, I am really bad at numbers. And Sheila could probably help me with this. But what would you get for that? It really depends on the land cost, right? So if you are building affordable housing in Ward 7 and 8, you get more units because the land's less valuable. Why is the land less valuable? So, but if you are trying to meaningfully integrate Ward 3, like that's gonna be a $200 million affordable housing unit. So it depends on where it is. It depends location. It depends on the additional subsidy that the project teams are getting, if they're getting HPTF dollars and LIHTC and LIHTC credits, right? So like, you know, are they combining other things? It's really, it depends.
Would that be paid out separately or is that covered by the fund?
Uh,
Like project credits?
I think the Young Dems need to have a separate session on project finance. But I'm happy to talk more about that.
I have some numbers. So between 2015 and 2022, DC spent $1.4 billion on affordable housing and created 9,000. So this is why preservation is so important. We're losing a ton of affordable housing every single year. And I would argue that the government is helping that to happen because they're giving our public resources to private developers that are engaging in land speculation, that are then building very unaffordable things for people. So I think because those costs are so high, we have to really focus on what Alex said before, land use, leveraging our public land to the best way possible. I represent the Brooklyn Manor Tenant Association right now. It's the last tenant association I represent. We're fighting to make sure that no housing is lost through that redevelopment, no affordable housing. And it has been a it's been a death struggle to make that, to fight that fight. And we've gotten very little support from DC politicians in that fight. In fact, DC politicians gave a tip of, I believe it was so long ago now, $47 million to help that development happen when that development eliminates affordability while tripling density on site. So we need to be focused on preservation as much as new building. And I would argue that we need a new system to build things because we're not getting the bang for our buck, throwing money at the private market. Before we finish up too, I've talked a lot about social housing. I'm gonna look in the camera. For anybody that wants to learn more, you can go to www.socialhousingcenter.org if you want to learn more about social housing.
Get your t-shirt.
Yeah.
We're gonna do about one more question and then we'll close up.
Hi, I'm Nick Manning, also from the Beacon Circle, I think a lot. I have just 2 points, just building on observations from Will. One, your point that a surprising amount of money goes into the machine and apparently relatively little comes out the other end. Just to the amateur observer, however well intended, it's impossible to understand, right? It's a bit tricky to work out why the sort of the housing support industry hasn't developed a meaningful dashboard that means we could actually understand the ratio between what's going in and what's coming out. Because it's so attractive to announce new initiatives. The numbers sound huge. You can't work out, like, why is nothing getting better? What's actually coming out the other end in terms of affordable housing? So it does seem there's some sort of relatively basic work to be done that would just help some well-intended observers like myself understand whether the problem is getting better or worse. The second point is just, I mean, the issue about mixed income social housing must be right. But the problem of public management of housing properties isn't so easily dismissed. So DC Housing Authority might be egregiously bad, but actually there's quite a litany of other publicly owned housing authorities that are absolutely shockingly awful. And I think that you need to somehow find somewhere nearer than Vienna or Singapore, just to somehow convey the idea it is actually possible to do this, right? Yeah, it's not, they don't help. Right, yeah, they're interesting examples, but like in European, there are a bunch of losing socialists, but who are they? They're essentially foreign. Right? So I think, to find some evidence that public management of housing assets is possible, I think would really help your case.
Well, let me just respond for a second, because the way the legislation is written in the social housing is that tenant association would be formed, they would pick a private management company to manage their housing. So it wouldn't be managed by a housing authority created by the government. There would be a private management company. Secondly, you know, the places that do housing very well in the United States, social housing, is university systems. I went to Ohio State University. Ohio State University has a huge social housing system that makes money for the university, and rents are affordable. So we do social housing in a lot of other aspects. And to your point, in Montgomery County, right across the line, they're doing it. So it's happening right next door.
Amazing. So what we're gonna do is close out statements from our panelists. And I'll hand it over to Ms. Maggie Edwards to close this out. But Mr. Edwards, you wanna close this out with any final thoughts? Or your
Yes.
call to action, people?
Well, yes, as far as, you know, myself and Redford City are concerned, you know, we could use, you know, you all's help when we have a call out to protest for better housing. We always need more soldiers. And then just, you know, we call ourselves a Christian, God-fearing, whatever nation. You know, bring some of that faith and belief and giving to lower income people into the housing. You know, there's a lot of talent, a lot of smarts, a lot of creativity there. But if they don't have housing, America's never going to benefit from all of that talent and creativity. So that's my ask from the record public.
Thank you, sir. Alex.
I think I'm still thinking about what is the best way to get involved with this, which is funny because a big component of my job is helping people get involved with things. I do always encourage, though, if you are looking at this stuff, I started by saying, don't have a scarcity mindset, don't pit things against each other. We know what we want to say no to. We hate developer profits. We hate big shiny buildings. We hate things that make us uncomfortable, but we don't totally know what we want to say yes to. And elected officials don't know that either. And they won't say yes to stuff unless they know that they have backup from people who will help them in a positive way. It is transactional. You have to get involved in the transaction. But a better way to do that is as a kind person who has someone's back, who is not spiteful. So, you know, you have an opportunity to run for local office. We have very low level offices in Washington, DC. They're called advisory neighborhood commissioners. We endorse commissioners. We endorse them on the basis of how they feel about housing, transportation, and land use. I try to make sure people show up to stuff because it matters. But I think have an expansive mindset. Don't pit things against each other. Know what you want to say no to, but think harder about what you want to say yes to. And support your elected officials. Maybe become one yourself, because these decisions are not easy.
I've talked enough, so I just want to thank everybody for allowing me to be here. It's been a great conversation.
I just like to say that to the extent that you are a political forum, to the extent that you're able to assist and to aid anyone who is thinking about purchasing a home, become knowledgeable about the various housing programs that are available, like HPAP, EPAP for government workers, NACA and DC Open Doors, FHA, they're all VA, all kinds of programs for yourselves and also to advocate and to encourage other people that you know to be able to first and foremost create jobs. Thank you.
A round of applause, our amazing panel.
Before I start talking, can we thank our panel once again, and also Jamal for I'm Maggie Edwards. I'm the co-chair of the Young Dems of Ward 6 committee. And I just want to thank everybody here for coming out tonight, you know, and really taking the opportunity to become more educated about like this crisis of housing affordability, if it's renting, if it's owning. And really, hearing from folks who are at the table every day and working on these issues. Kind of just want to thank everybody, who have been involved in the whole entire planning of this process, from the Young Dems of Ward 6 side and also from the Young Dems of Ward 2 side. I know some folks are in the room. If you could stand up, that way we could thank you for really creating the space to have these conversations. And kind of with that, kind of thank you all again. We are going to be going over to Urban Roost, which is right across Urban Roast. I always want to say Roost, I think, because we had the Roost was where the first one was at Urban Roast, to kind of continue this conversation in a more, informal setting, casual, allow folks to, one, connect with our panelists up here, and also connect with each other and just talk about this really important issue. I do also want to thank, while we're all here, Greater Washington, who is joining us as a sponsor of the panel. So, or not panel, but also of the happy hour. So if folks, want to kind of, we also only have this room for a little bit longer. So I will be that person and say, why don't we all grab our things and, make our way over to Urban Road to continue the conversation. So thank you.
Bye.
Hey, thanks.